The sunlight filtered through the kitchen window in soft golden bands as I stood at the sink, rinsing off the breakfast dishes. Gregory sat at the counter, reading the newspaper, as if it were any other morning in our decades-long marriage. He reached for his coffee, and without so much as glancing up, he said it. Talia's wedding is going to be family only. The plate slipped from my hand and clattered against the porcelain sink. I turned, drying my hands on the dish towel. Family only? I asked, blinking. Gregory, I am her family. He didn't flinch. He folded the paper, slow and deliberate, and finally met my eyes. She thinks it'll be less awkward if you don't come. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The silence between us felt like a chasm. Less awkward for who? And what does that even mean? She just doesn't want tension, he said, standing and placing his mug in the sink beside me, as if we were still having an ordinary conversation. She thought it would be best. I pressed the edge of the towel into my palms to keep from shaking. So you both decided this? Without even talking to me. He rubbed the back of his neck. It's not personal, Marla. You're overreacting. It's just a wedding. Just a wedding. Just a wedding. The words echoed through my skull like wind through a hollow house. Talia was my daughter. I had raised her through chickenpox and broken arms, through ballet recitals and teenage heartbreaks. I'd sat in the car during every rainy practice, cheered for every school play, even the one where she only had 2 lines. I'd held her hand through college rejections, brought her tea when she cried over her first serious boyfriend. I remembered nights when Gregory was away on business and she'd crawled into bed beside me, needing comfort. And now it would be less awkward if I didn't come? I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I walked out of the kitchen and into the bedroom, closed the door softly, and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the framed photo on my nightstand, the 3 of us on Talia's graduation day. I studied my face. The way I stood slightly behind them, smiling. Almost always behind. They called it family only, but I wasn't considered family anymore. Later that night, when I asked Talia for an explanation, her voice was stiff with defensiveness. Mom, you're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. I just want things to go smoothly. Smoothly? I repeated, trying to keep my voice level. And me being there would ruin that? She sighed. It's not about you. It's just, Everett's mom can be judgmental, and I don't know. I don't want drama. I swallowed hard. So you chose convenience over love. Got it. Don't guilt-trip me. You're always so sensitive, she snapped. Gregory chimed in from the background, his voice tinny through the speakerphone. It's one day, Marla. Don't blow this out of proportion. But it wasn't just one day. It was the culmination of years of slow erosion. Of becoming invisible in my own life. Of being the one who smoothed the rough edges, who made things easier for everyone else. The one who never asked for much, never made demands. The buffer. The background. And now I was being written out completely. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I ended the call, sat still for a long time, and then stood with a strange, unexpected calm. In the quiet of my bedroom, I pulled my suitcase from the closet. Not the big one, just the small roller bag, enough for a week. I opened the drawer where I kept my passport. I stared at it for a few seconds, my fingers resting lightly on the cover. Illyria. The name had surfaced in my mind like a whisper. I had read about it in a travel magazine once. Whitewashed buildings, winding coastal streets, silence, and sea air. It sounded like a place that didn't require explanations. A place where I didn't have to be anyone's wife or mother. Just Marla. I booked the trip online. It felt unreal, even as I typed in my credit card number. Not reckless, liberating. That night, I wrote a note. Not to Talia. Not to Gregory. Just a small piece of paper left on the kitchen counter. Gone for a while. Don't wait up. The next morning, I locked the front door behind me, the click of the deadbolt oddly satisfying. I walked down the driveway with only my bag and my purse, not looking back. Not once. They had made a choice. And now, so had I. The morning air held that in-between chill, neither cold nor warm, just the kind that seeps into your skin and makes you second-guess everything. I tightened the scarf around my neck and stepped into the taxi, the small roller bag bumping behind me like a quiet companion. The driver barely made eye contact as he asked, "Airport," and I nodded, voice stuck somewhere between my heart and throat. As we pulled away from the house, I didn't look back. I expected a swell of emotion, guilt, fear, doubt. But what I felt, sitting in the back seat watching the sleepy streets pass by, was something closer to relief. My hands unclenched. My lungs felt fuller. I wasn't running away. I was walking, no, flying, towards something I hadn't let myself want in a long time. Space. At the airport, I kept my sunglasses on. Not because it was sunny, but because the anonymity helped. The terminal buzzed with the usual chaos, families arguing over boarding passes, a businessman yelling into a Bluetooth headset, children tugging on their parents' coats. I moved through it like a ghost, unbothered, almost serene. Nobody needed anything from me here. No one expected me to fill in the gaps. Once seated on the plane, I buckled my seatbelt and exhaled. The flight attendant's smile was professional, distant, and oddly comforting. I ordered sparkling water before takeoff and opened the in-flight magazine, though I didn't read a single word. My mind wandered to memories I hadn't dusted off in years. I saw myself carrying a 4-year-old Talia out of ballet class, her pink tutu muddy at the edges from playing outside before class. I remembered rushing from work to get her there on time, still in heels, pretending not to notice the judgment from other mothers who didn't work. I saw the nervous smile she gave me backstage at every school play, the way she always searched the audience until our eyes met. And I always made sure to be there, even when Gregory had meetings, even when I was running on fumes. I remembered high school heartbreaks, ice cream eaten straight from the tub, the time I stayed up all night helping her sew a last-minute costume for Spirit Week because she forgot to tell me. The 100 little moments that never made it into photo albums or social media posts. But they were real. They mattered. So how had we ended up here? How had I become an inconvenience? A source of tension? The seatbelt sign blinked off and the plane lifted above the clouds. I stared out the window, watching the world below grow smaller and blurrier. It felt fitting. I wasn't part of that world for now. I didn't want to be. When the pilot announced we were descending into Illyria, I looked at my reflection in the scratched window. I looked older, yes. Tired, definitely. But I also saw something softer, maybe not peace, not yet, but the beginning of it. The potential. Illyria welcomed me like a sigh. The airport was small, quiet, almost sleepy. A shuttle took me down winding coastal roads framed by cliffs and rows of painted houses. And then, there it was, the villa. I'd found it on a last-minute site, a single photo drawing me in, a balcony with 2 chairs, facing the sea. Now, standing at the entrance with the key in my hand, it felt like I'd stepped into a postcard. The inside smelled faintly of lavender and salt. Whitewashed walls reflected the late afternoon light. The windows were wide and open, letting in the sound of waves breaking gently against the shore. I walked barefoot through the villa, touching nothing, just breathing it all in. It was simple, quiet. A place that didn't ask anything of me. I walked out onto the balcony and stood there for a long time. The sky was a wash of pink and amber, and the sea glittered like it knew I needed something to believe in again. I took off my shoes and sat down, feet propped on the cool stone railing. Then, without thinking too much about it, I took a photo. My legs stretched out, toes pointed lazily at the horizon. The sea beyond. No face, no smile, no explanation. Just the truth. I opened my social media app and posted the picture with a single caption, "Silence suits me." I didn't wait to see who liked it. I closed the app and turned my phone face down. Dinner was a simple affair, a local seafood stew at a restaurant down the road where no one asked my name. I sat at a table alone, sipping a glass of crisp white wine, watching other people talk and laugh. It didn't make me lonely. It made me feel invisible in the best way. Untethered. That night, in the villa's small bedroom, I slipped under cool linen sheets and listened to the ocean instead of the sound of anyone else's needs. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone's placeholder. I just felt like me. Morning broke gently in Illyria, and I let it. No alarm, no rush, no voices calling my name. Just the whisper of the sea outside the window and the rustle of the linen curtains dancing in the breeze. I stretched across the bed, my body already loosening in a way it hadn't in years. I didn't leap out of bed to check a calendar or heat up coffee for anyone else. I moved slowly, deliberately, soaking in the rare luxury of stillness. The villa's kitchen was small but cozy. I made myself a cup of strong coffee and brought it out to the balcony, where the sun was already painting the sky in soft tones of coral and gold. My feet propped on the railing again, I stared at the horizon. That line where sky and water met had always fascinated me. No matter how far you went, you could never quite reach it. Maybe that's what peace was, a horizon. Visible, endless, but just far enough away to keep you walking. I spent the next few days giving myself permission to do nothing, and it felt decadent. I swam in the cold sea, letting it shock the tension out of my muscles. I laid on warm sand with salt-dampened hair, not caring what I looked like. I strolled the rocky cliffs until my legs ached and my heart felt full from the sheer beauty of it all. There were no to-do lists, no, just one more thing, no invisible obligations pressing against my chest. Each evening, I found a new little spot to eat, tiny cafes tucked into cobblestone alleys or breezy patios overlooking the surf. No one asked me what I did. No one cared who I belonged to. Here, I wasn't a role or a title. I was just Marla. That realization alone could have brought me to tears if I let it. On the third evening, my phone buzzed. I stared at it like it had grown teeth. A message from Corinne, my sister. "You're not at the wedding." Why? What's going on? No punctuation, no warmth, just confusion. I hesitated for a moment, then replied simply, "Ask them." I left it at that. The silence from Gregory and Talia, on the other hand, was deafening. Not a word, not a message, not even a passive-aggressive like on my recent photo. They didn't need to say anything, their absence was statement enough. And for once, I didn't rush to fill the silence with explanations. I let it stretch and breathe, even if it hurt a little. That was the strangest part, how their silence, once something I feared, had become a kind of music. I listened to it now. Not for clues or criticism, but for what it revealed. It told me I'd been holding up too much for too long. They didn't know how to function without me bridging the gaps, soothing the tempers, making things okay again. And now, with me gone, the cracks were showing. I walked back inside and poured another glass of water. The villa felt more like home than my actual home ever had. Not because of the decor or the view, but because I was the only one filling it. The next morning, I woke with the sun and swam before breakfast. I swam long and hard, letting the salt sting my skin and the cold water chase away any lingering guilt. Afterward, I wrapped myself in a towel and sat on the shore, watching the waves crash in rhythmic surrender. Nature had no problem letting go and starting again. Why had I? At noon, I lounged on the terrace with a book I never opened. My thoughts were louder than the words on the page. I thought about the years I'd been the invisible glue, the silent peacemaker. I thought about every time I swallowed my own needs to keep the household running. Every time I smiled through Gregory's dismissiveness or backed down from Talia's sharpness because she was just stressed. And now that I had stepped out of frame, they didn't know what to do with the empty space. I closed my eyes and listened, not to them, but to myself. And in that quiet, I realized something unfamiliar and yet utterly right. I liked it here. I liked not explaining, not defending, not constantly giving and giving without anyone noticing the cost. I liked hearing only the sound of birds and waves and my own steady breath. Later, I checked my phone again, half expecting an apology or, at the very least, another confused message from Corinne. Still nothing. But oddly, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt untethered. There's a difference. That evening, I went for a walk along the cliffside as the sky turned violet and the wind picked up. The breeze wrapped around me like a shawl, and for the first time in what felt like years, I felt held. Not by a person, not by obligation, but by this place, by its stillness, its simplicity, its quiet affirmation that I was enough, even when no one else said so. When I returned to the villa, I stood for a long moment at the doorway before going inside. And as I closed the door behind me, I didn't feel like I was shutting anything out. I felt like I was finally shutting everything in. I had just settled into a woven lounge chair on the terrace, a glass of fresh lemonade sweating in my hand, when my phone began to vibrate. At first, I ignored it. I assumed it was a notification, maybe a travel app reminding me to explore the town market or a spam call trying to sell me something I'd never need again. But when it vibrated a second time, then a third, then a fourth, each within moments of the last, I glanced at the screen. Missed call. Gregory. Then another, Talia. And then, to my shock, Everett. I set the phone down, screen glowing face up on the table. I didn't open the messages. I didn't answer the calls. I didn't want to hear the tremble in Gregory's voice, the fake innocence in Talia's carefully selected words, or Everett's undoubtedly panicked apology, even though he was the one person who hadn't told me to stay home. Instead, I reached for the small brass bell beside the villa's entrance and rang for the host to bring me another drink, a local blend I'd been wanting to try. Something with wild herbs and citrus. Something strong and sharp, the kind of drink that made your throat burn but your heart feel clearer. When the host arrived, I accepted the glass with a grateful smile, my phone still flashing with incoming calls beside me. I didn't even bother flipping it over. It could ring until the battery died. I had no interest in saving anyone from the consequences of their choices. I took the first sip, earthy, bitter, with a bright note at the end. Refreshing in the strangest way. I closed my eyes and listened to the waves crashing against the cliffs, steady and eternal. No amount of missed calls could drown that sound out. And for once, I didn't feel guilty for prioritizing it. A few minutes later, the phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Corinne. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something in me twitched. Corinne wasn't like the others. She didn't meddle, but she didn't vanish either. And besides, she was never one for dramatic calls. If she was ringing, there was a reason. I answered with a quiet, hello, bracing myself. Marla, she breathed, not bothering with greetings. What the hell happened? To what? I asked, though I already knew. The wedding, she said, her voice an urgent whisper, like she was reporting something from behind enemy lines. It was a disaster. I blinked. I'm listening. She exhaled sharply. You didn't hear? Talia found Everett texting his ex, some college girl, apparently. He was denying everything, but then the ex showed up. In person. At the reception. I sat upright. She showed up in a red dress, no invitation, walked straight to Talia and said, he told me he wasn't sure about marrying you. Right there, in front of everyone. I let that sink in. Then Everett's mom accused Talia of orchestrating the whole thing for attention. Gregory tried to intervene and wound up yelling at the DJ, who shut off the music. Half the guests left before dessert. I felt no satisfaction at her words, at least, not the petty kind. What I felt was quieter. A confirmation, maybe. Proof that no amount of planning or control could protect you from truth. The truth always has a way of arriving, whether it's in the form of a forgotten ex or a mother who finally says no. And you know what? Corinne said, her tone shifting. Everyone kept asking where you were. Some assumed you were sick. Others, well, Gregory told people you were taking a break. I let out a quiet laugh, surprised by its lightness. A break, I repeated. Yeah. He made it sound like you'd gone on some sort of mental health retreat. Not far off, I said, glancing out at the water. Except I booked it myself. Without anyone's permission. There was a pause, and then Corinne said, softer now, Marla, I don't know what's been going on between you and them. But I do know this, you didn't deserve that. No, I agreed, the word landing like a stone in still water. I didn't. I thanked her for the call and ended it gently. I didn't feel the need to dwell or rehash. There would be time for that, or maybe there wouldn't. Right now, I had no interest in folding myself back into their chaos. Not now. Maybe not ever. I looked back down at my phone. Still buzzing. A fresh voicemail, probably another apology trying to disguise itself as an explanation. I stood, drink in hand, and walked to the edge of the balcony. Below, the sea churned and sparkled like it had secrets of its own. And I smiled, just a small curve of my lips, but it was real. They wanted me to be the cleanup crew again, to slide in quietly and make everyone feel better about what had gone wrong. But this time, I wasn't going to be the duct tape on a collapsing structure. I took another sip of the drink, let the burn fill my chest, and turned my phone off. Let them ring. Let the silence answer. The sun filtered through the shutters as I opened my eyes slowly, letting myself drift in and out of that peaceful space between sleep and waking. There was no alarm, no one calling my name, no breakfast to make for someone else. Just the quiet hum of the ceiling fan and the distant rhythm of waves licking the shore. My body felt lighter, like it had finally exhaled something it had been holding onto for years. I reached over to the bedside table to check the time, but my eyes landed on my phone first. It was back on now, only because I'd needed it to confirm a massage appointment at the spa near the cliffs. The notifications blinked like little flare guns, desperate to get my attention. Talia's message sat at the top. "Mom, I messed up. Please call me." For a moment, I just stared at it. The words were simple, but I could hear her voice in them. That practiced tone she used when she was caught in something but wanted to sound remorseful enough to skip real accountability. Still, there was something else in it too. Something that wasn't polished or rehearsed. Maybe for the first time, she didn't know how to spin it. Below her message were 3 missed calls from Gregory. I didn't play the voicemails immediately. I knew exactly what they'd sound like. One would be calm, calculated, his lawyer voice, the one he used when trying to make something sound reasonable even when it was anything but. The next would be frustrated, maybe even angry, subtly blaming me for how everything had unfolded. And then, finally, the last would shift. The voice would crack just a little. The pleading would begin. I sat at the edge of the bed, the tile cool under my feet, and looked out the open window toward the horizon. It was funny how far away they all felt, even though they were just a few thousand miles from me. Not years. Not planets. But emotionally, I might as well have been on another world entirely. A notification chimed again. Another voicemail from Gregory. This time, I tapped to play. "Marla," his voice said, already strained. "Look, I know things didn't go the way they were supposed to. Talia's a mess, and honestly, I think your absence made everything harder. I'm not blaming you." I laughed out loud. "Not blaming me. Of course. But you've always known how to keep the peace. You've always been the one who smooths things over, who talks sense into people. You weren't there when things fell apart, and maybe that's part of why they did. Please, can we just talk?" I stopped the message before it ended and tossed the phone onto the bed. It wasn't surprising, not really. Gregory had always counted on me to play the steady one, the emotional airbag. Every time Talia lashed out, every time his family crossed the line or he forgot something important, I was the patch kit. Quiet, dependable, never needing a thank you. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I stood up, tied my hair into a loose knot, and grabbed my bag. My massage was scheduled in an hour, and I was determined not to waste even a second of this stillness. The walk to the spa was slow and scenic, winding along stone paths lined with lavender bushes and flowering vines. I breathed deeply as I walked, the scent of salt and earth filling my lungs. The world felt quieter here, not just in sound, but in expectation. No one here needed anything from me. At the spa, I was greeted with warm smiles and offered mint-infused water before being led to a room that smelled like eucalyptus and clean linen. The therapist asked if I had any areas of tension, and I laughed gently. "Everywhere," I said. As she worked, needing years of stress from my back and shoulders, I let myself drift. My mind, for once, didn't spiral with what-ifs or guilt. I thought instead of a day years ago when Talia was maybe 7 and she'd fallen and scraped her knee. I remembered sitting with her in the bathroom, cleaning the wound while she cried and clung to me. I told her then, "I'll always be here, no matter what." But I realize now I never said I'd be invisible. I never agreed to be forgotten. The massage ended, and I lay there a few minutes longer, feeling hollow in the best way. Empty, but open. Like I'd made room for something new. Back at the villa, I checked my phone once more. Talia had sent another message. "I get it if you're angry. I didn't know how much you held together. I'm sorry." It was the closest thing to a real apology she'd ever offered. And yet, I didn't feel the urge to reply. Not because I was bitter, but because I didn't need to explain myself anymore. I didn't need to soothe her guilt or remind her of who I was. She could sit with the discomfort for a while. Maybe it would teach her something. I poured a glass of wine, walked barefoot to the balcony, and watched the sun sink slowly into the sea. They could keep calling. They could send words filled with regret and hope and attempts to pull me back into their orbit. But I had found something far more powerful than their apologies. I had found the choice not to answer. The morning unfolded like a watercolor, soft, unhurried, touched with light. I left the villa early, drawn by a need to wander, to move without purpose or destination. The art district in Illyria sat just past the cliffs, tucked between narrow alleys and sun-warmed stone buildings that wore history like a second skin. I'd passed it a few times before, always meaning to explore, and today I finally let my feet carry me there. Shutters were beginning to open as I walked, revealing glimpses of life. A woman setting out hand-painted tiles on a folding table, a man arranging bright ceramics in a window display. The air smelled of citrus and clay, and the breeze lifted my hair from the back of my neck like a blessing. I stepped into a small gallery with faded blue doors, the kind that creaked a little when they opened. Inside, it was quiet, dim, and cool, with sunlight pouring in through skylights and landing in golden squares on the floor. Abstracts, portraits, sketches, pieces lined the walls in no particular order, as if the curator had placed them with instinct more than strategy. I wandered slowly, letting each piece speak on its own terms. Some whispered, some shouted. But it was a painting in the corner that stopped me cold. It wasn't the image that caught me, though the work was lovely, soft brushstrokes of a woman alone in a field, her back turned to the viewer, wind pulling at her dress. It was the quote stenciled above the frame in delicate black letters. We never notice the frame until the picture falls. Something in me went still. I read it again slowly, as if my brain needed time to translate what my heart already knew. All these years, I had been the frame. I had held things together, not as the subject, but as the silent support. The one who remembered birthdays when no one else did, who bought the card, signed it for everyone, and mailed it on time. The one who cooked the holiday dinners, even when she was sick. The one who made sure the car was serviced, the uniforms were clean, the light bulbs replaced. And when things broke, when emotions snapped and arguments erupted, it was me who stepped in to patch the gaps and smooth the edges. No one noticed the frame. Not until I stopped holding the picture up. I turned away from the painting, suddenly feeling exposed, as if someone had peeled back my skin and revealed all the quiet sacrifices underneath. I remembered the Mother's Day when Talia texted me at 3 p.m., a blurry photo of flowers with the caption, "Happy Mother's Day." Like it had just occurred to her. No call. No card. Gregory had muttered something about her being busy. I remembered the year they forgot my birthday altogether. Gregory tried to cover for it by taking me to dinner 2 days later. Talia didn't even apologize, just said, "Oh God, I feel so bad," and then moved on. I told myself it was fine. I told myself it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered. I left the gallery with my thoughts heavy in my chest. My feet moved slowly over the uneven stones of the alley, the bright colors around me blurred by the swirl of realization. I had allowed myself to be diminished in my own story. I had handed them the pen and let them sketch me in the margins. And the cruelest part? They loved the picture. They just never thought twice about what held it together. Back at the villa, I sat on the balcony with a cup of strong coffee, the quote echoing through my mind. I was tired of being the frame. Tired of being invisible until my absence caused inconvenience. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Gregory. I didn't open it, but the preview on the screen showed the first few words. "I know you feel unappreciated." I set the phone down. There was no sentence he could write that would undo the years of being overlooked. No paragraph long enough to fill the space where validation should have lived. I opened my journal instead. Not the kind I used to keep with meal plans and to-do lists. This one was different. I'd bought it in town, its cover stitched with sea blue thread, blank pages smelling faintly of ink and possibility. I wrote down the quote, "We never notice the frame until the picture falls." Then I wrote, "They let me fall." I underlined it twice. Later that afternoon, I returned to the gallery and bought a small print of the woman in the field. I didn't need the original, just a reminder. Not of what I'd been, but of what I was choosing to become. Someone who stepped out of the frame. Someone who stopped holding up pictures that no longer deserved a place on her wall. That evening, I cooked for myself. Not something quick or simple, but a meal that took time. Fresh ingredients from the market: garlic, tomatoes, handmade pasta. I poured a glass of wine and ate slowly, savoring every bite, every silence. There was no one to please, no one to impress. Just me. And that, I was learning, was enough. The sun was low when I first saw her, barefoot in the sand. Long linen pants rolled up to her calves, a floppy straw hat shielding her from the light. She stood ankle-deep in the water, unmoving, as though she were waiting for something to arrive on the tide. I'd gone for a late walk along the beach, hoping to clear the fog of thoughts that had gathered over the last few days, but I found myself slowing as I neared her, drawn by a quiet energy that felt strangely familiar. She turned just slightly, as though sensing me, and smiled. Not the practiced, polite kind I was so used to from years of PTA meetings and neighborhood parties. This one was real. Soft. Easy. "You're American," she said, not as a question, but a recognition. I nodded, stepping closer. "Guilty." She laughed. "We always find each other, don't we?" "I'm Elena." "Marla," I said, offering my hand. Her grip was firm, grounded. The kind of handshake that doesn't try to prove anything. We started walking together along the waterline, saying nothing for a while. Our feet sank into the wet sand with every step, waves rolling in and pulling at our ankles like playful children. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was comforting, like we both understood the weight the other carried and didn't need to fill the space with noise. Eventually, she spoke. "I've been coming here for 3 years now. Always around this time." I glanced over at her. She had the kind of face that had known joy and loss in equal measure, lines around her eyes that told stories I hadn't heard yet. "To escape?" I asked gently. "To remember," she said. "And to forget. I lost my husband 4 years ago. Cancer. By the time we knew, it was too late." "I'm sorry." She gave a small nod, as though accepting the words, but not needing them. "And you? What brings you to Illyria?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say something breezy, vague. A vacation. A spontaneous break. But looking at her, this woman who had already cracked her heart open once and was still standing in the surf, I told the truth. My daughter got married. I wasn't invited. She didn't gasp or offer quick condolences. She simply kept walking. "That's cruel," she said after a moment. "And familiar." "You too?" I asked. "Not a wedding, no. But my son, he pulled away after David died. Said I was too emotional, too much. That he needed space." She shrugged. "At first, I thought I had to fix it. Call more. Apologize. Even though I hadn't done anything. Eventually, I stopped. I realized I was just handing him more rope to hang me with." I let her words settle into me. There was something freeing about hearing it from someone else's lips. That shared ache of being cast aside not because of wrongdoing, but because your presence became inconvenient. We found a small outcropping of rocks and sat down together. The horizon burned gold and orange, the sea catching every hue and tossing it back like a mirror. Elena reached into her canvas bag and pulled out a bottle of chilled white wine and 2 tin cups. I raised a brow, amused. "Prepared, are we?" She grinned. "It's not my first sunset." We drank slowly, the wine dry and crisp, carrying hints of something floral. With every sip, my shoulders loosened. The tension that had held me hostage for months, no, years, began to ebb away like the tide pulling at the shore. We talked more, but not constantly. There were long pauses where we just watched the sea or dug our toes into the cool sand. We told each other stories about motherhood, about how lonely it could feel to always be strong, about the quiet grief of losing yourself one compromise at a time. I told her about the birthdays forgotten, The way Talia used to hug me tightly as a little girl and then grew cold, transactional. I told her how Gregory had stopped asking how I felt somewhere around year 10 of our marriage, how I became the family calendar, the house manager, the ghost. You know, Elena said, staring out at the waves, no one ever thanks the lighthouse for staying lit. They just expect it. And when it finally breaks or dims, they blame it for the crush. The words sank into me like stone. She reached over and gently squeezed my hand. But you're here now, which means you haven't burned out completely. No, I said quietly. Not yet. We stayed until the sun dipped completely below the horizon, the sky deepening into blue. We stood, brushing sand off our clothes, our empty cups dangling from our fingers. And for once, there was no pressure to promise future plans or swap contact info. Just two women who had sat in the truth of who they were, without judgment or performance. As we walked back toward the villas, Elena paused and pulled off her sandals. I followed her lead, letting my bare feet sink into the damp sand. The cool grains wrapped around my toes, grounding me. We didn't speak again. We didn't need to. The silence said everything. We were still here, still standing. And for tonight, that was enough. The email came mid-morning, landing in my inbox like a slap across the face. The subject line was as blunt as the message itself. Come home. No salutation. No warmth. Just 2 lines from Gregory. You've made your point. Come home. I stared at the screen, blinking once. Then again. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't wonder if I needed anything, or if I was safe, or why I'd chosen Illyria in the first place. He didn't ask how it felt to be uninvited from our daughter's wedding, or what it had done to me to hear it come from his lips. No. He assumed I had made some grand, dramatic gesture to punish them, and now, having delivered my message, was expected to return on cue like a scolded pet. You've made your point. As if it was about making a point. As if I hadn't spent years speaking in gentle warnings and quiet disappointments, only to be dismissed again and again. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I closed the laptop and walked barefoot to the edge of the balcony, where the breeze lifted my hair off my shoulders and the sea glittered with indifference. It didn't care about broken families or brittle emails. It kept moving always. The silence in Illyria had become a kind of refuge. I had feared it at first, that quiet might amplify my sadness, that it would press on all the bruises I'd been too afraid to touch. But it hadn't. Silence here felt like a balm. It asked nothing of me. It allowed me to simply be. I left the balcony and pulled on a flowing linen dress, something loose and soft against my skin. Then I grabbed my bag and headed toward the harbor. I wasn't in the mood to stay indoors, much less stare at a computer screen trying to find the right way to respond to someone who never truly listened. My phone buzzed as I reached the narrow stone steps that led to the waterfront. I paused, heart tight, and opened the notification. A voice message from Talia. I hesitated, then pressed play. Mom. Hi. I'm sorry. I know you don't want to hear from me, and I don't blame you. Her voice cracked. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought keeping the peace meant keeping things simple. But everything fell apart anyway. Everett, he's gone. And I don't know what I was thinking. I hurt you. I see that now. She exhaled, shaky. I just want to talk. Please. Even if it's just to yell at me. I miss you. I stood frozen for a long moment, the gulls circling overhead, the salty wind brushing my face. I could feel something cracking inside, not anger, not forgiveness, but something quieter. Sadness, maybe. A grief for what could have been. A mourning of the years I spent softening the world for everyone else while no one softened it for me. Talia's message didn't erase that, but it acknowledged it. I made my way to the harbor cafe I'd passed each day but never entered, its white chairs scattered under olive trees, the scent of grilled fish and lemon wafting through the air. I asked for a table for one and chose a spot facing the water. The server brought me a menu and a knowing smile. I must have looked like I belonged here now, sun-kissed, peaceful, unhurried. I ordered the catch of the day and a glass of local wine. Then I pulled out my phone, scrolled back to Gregory's email, and typed 3 words in reply. Extended my stay. No greeting. No sign-off. No explanation. I hit send and turned my phone off completely, placing it face down beside my plate. I wasn't interested in being dragged back into a life that only valued me when I was performing, pleasing, available. I wasn't interested in negotiating my worth through silence and guilt. I wasn't ready to talk. Not to Gregory, and maybe not even to Talia, not yet. The food arrived, grilled sea bass with rosemary, a side of crisp greens, and roasted lemon halves. I ate slowly, savoring each bite like it was something sacred. This was nourishment. Not just for my body, but for my soul. I had forgotten what it felt like to care for myself with this kind of intentionality. To eat without multitasking, without fielding complaints or reheating leftovers that no one had touched. After lunch, I wandered the market near the harbor. I bought a small clay dish shaped like a seashell, its edges painted gold. A gift for myself. A reminder. I'd spent a lifetime collecting souvenirs for others, always thinking of what Gregory or Talia might like. Not this time. As the sun began to lower, painting the sky in amber and rose, I found a quiet table at a wine bar nestled between 2 galleries. I ordered a glass of something local and dry, and I wrote in my journal. Not about them. About me. What I saw. What I felt. What I wanted next. For the first time in years, the answer wasn't someone else's name. It was mine. Marla. Still here. Still standing. Still rewriting the story. And for tonight, that was enough. The morning light touched everything gently. The whitewashed walls of the villa, the folds of my linen sheets, the rim of my half-drunk coffee mug. I sat by the window, knees pulled to my chest, listening to the quiet. Not the kind of silence that demands answers or the icy kind born of resentment. This was a warm, generous stillness, like the earth was holding its breath for me, letting me decide how to fill it. I had been here for weeks now. The days stretched long and forgiving, unburdened by expectations. I no longer felt the itch to check my phone or anticipate anyone's needs, but my own. The rhythm of life in Illyria had soaked into my skin, slow walks, good food, salty breezes, long afternoons with my thoughts. I wasn't healing in the dramatic, cinematic way I'd once imagined. I was simply remembering. Remembering what it felt like to be a woman, not a role. To be Marla, not Mom, not Mrs. Coleman, not the fixer, the cook, the buffer between arguments. Just Marla. A name, not a function. I picked up my phone only once that morning to post a photo. The view from the terrace, the sea stretching wide and blue under a soft gray sky. My feet, bare as ever, crossed at the ankle, a cup of espresso balanced on my thigh. The caption came easily this time, no second guessing. Turns out, overreacting looks like peace. I posted it without caring how it would land. Whether it stung Gregory. Whether Talia read it and cried. Whether anyone thought it was dramatic. It wasn't for them. It was for me. A simple declaration, not of anger, but of clarity. I didn't scroll through the likes. I didn't wait for comments. In fact, I closed the app as soon as I posted it, set the phone aside, and pulled my journal into my lap. There was a time when I thought identity came from how others saw me, how well I held the family together, how efficiently I handled chaos. I wore my sacrifices like quiet medals, the parties I planned, the fights I defused, the nights I stayed up sewing costumes or proofreading papers or wrapping last-minute gifts. I thought my usefulness was proof of my love. But what it really did was make me forget myself. I remembered the way Gregory would introduce me at work functions, not as Marla, not even as his wife, but as Talia's mom, or the one who keeps us sane. Never once did he ask about my interests in front of others, never once mentioned the short stories I used to write or the painting classes I gave up when Talia was born. It wasn't cruelty. It was erasure, dressed as comfort. Dismissal, masked as stability. I wrote for over an hour, letting the thoughts spill out unfiltered. I didn't edit myself. I didn't try to make it sound wise or poetic. I wrote about being forgotten, and then I wrote about how it felt to remember. The first morning I woke up here and didn't immediately check for messages. The first time I made a meal only for myself and didn't feel guilty. The first time I looked in the mirror and saw my own eyes, not a tired stranger. Later that day, I wandered through the marketplace, letting myself be drawn to whatever caught my eye. A woven bag dyed with plant pigments. A hand-carved spoon. A small clay pendant shaped like a wave. I bought them all. Not because I needed them, but because they made me feel something. At a cafe tucked beside a bookshop, I ordered a caffè doppio and sat outside beneath the striped awning. The people around me spoke in soft bursts of Italian, their words rising and falling like music. I didn't understand most of it, but I liked that. It gave me space to observe, to be present without being pulled into anyone else's needs. For a long moment, I just watched the square. A child chasing pigeons. An old man lighting a cigarette with shaky hands. A couple laughing over shared dessert. None of them knew who I was, and none of them needed to. I didn't have to explain my absence. I didn't have to justify my joy. That was the gift of being unnamed. Of reclaiming your own name. When I paid my bill, the server smiled. Grazie, signora. Marla, I corrected gently, smiling back. Just Marla. He nodded, repeating it with perfect ease. Marla. Walking back to the villa, I felt a stillness inside me I hadn't felt since before I became someone else's everything. There was no ache to return home, no tug of guilt or longing. Home, I realized, didn't have to be a place. It could be a version of yourself you thought had vanished. And here, in this quiet town by the sea, I had found her again. Not loud, not triumphant, just steady, whole. That night, I sat on the balcony, a glass of wine in hand, and whispered my name aloud. Marla. It rang soft and true. And this time, I didn't need anyone else to say it for me. My last morning in Illyria arrived with no fanfare, no urgent packing or sad goodbyes. Just the same hush that had greeted me on the first day, the ocean humming softly beyond the windows, the light casting long streaks of gold across the villa's tile floor. I sat out on the balcony in my robe, a warm mug of coffee in hand, watching the sea stretch endlessly toward the horizon. The waves rolled in slow and smooth, mirroring the calm inside me. I didn't cry. I thought I might, at least a little. But I didn't feel grief. What I felt was presence. A grounded knowing that this place had done what I asked of it. It held me. Not because I was broken or needed rescuing, but because I needed somewhere quiet enough to remember myself. I watched the fishermen launch their boats in the distance, seagulls circling overhead, and smiled to myself. No phone calls. No emails. I had kept my phone off since the night I told Gregory the first was extending my stay. I hadn't even opened Talia's last message. I didn't need to. Whatever she wanted to say could wait until I was ready to listen, and there was power in that delay. Eventually, I stood, stretched, and began to gather my things. Not in a rush. Just one item at a time, folding slowly, savoring the routine. I tucked the clay wave pendant into my carry-on, along with the little dish from the market and the framed print of the woman in the field. My souvenirs weren't for anyone else. No gifts to prove where I'd been. No trinkets to earn forgiveness. These were mine, tokens of a life paused, examined, reclaimed. The villa was quiet when I left. I didn't linger at the door. I didn't look back. I simply rolled my suitcase over the smooth stone path toward the waiting taxi. Back home, the air felt heavier. Familiar in the way a too-tight coat is, something that once fit, but now constricted. The house was clean, neat, and deeply silent. No smells of food, no movement upstairs. Gregory's car was gone. So was most of his closet. I realized later when I walked into the bedroom and found empty hangers staring back at me. No note. No confrontation. Just absence. And honestly, I didn't feel the urge to chase answers. I went to the guest room, where the dress I'd bought months ago still hung on the back of the closet door, the pale lavender mother-of-the-bride dress. The one I'd never worn. I ran my fingers over the fabric once, then gently took it down and laid it across the bed. Then, with more peace than sadness, I folded it into a donation bag along with a few other things that no longer fit my life, heels I hadn't worn in years, scarves that smelled faintly of past holidays, a stack of framed family photos that felt more like performance than memory. I signed up for a painting class that afternoon. Not because I wanted to master it, but because I remembered how it felt to lose myself in color, to press brush to canvas without a plan. I hadn't painted in nearly 20 years. There was a small studio downtown, tucked between a florist and a wine shop, offering beginner classes on Wednesday nights. I registered with one click and smiled. I didn't tell anyone. Not Talia. Not Gregory. Not Corinne. That evening, I dressed in a simple blouse and jeans, stepped into comfortable flats, and walked to a cafe I'd never noticed before. It sat on a corner near the library, quiet and filled with the smell of espresso and orange zest. I chose a table by the window, ordered a coffee and a buttery almond pastry, and pulled my journal from my bag. I wrote slowly, not about them, but about me. The things I wanted now. The ways I wanted to be seen. Not for what I provided, but for who I was. No one stopped me. No one interrupted. I sipped espresso, listened to soft music overhead, and let the page hold my thoughts. I wasn't thinking of Gregory's absence. I wasn't wondering what Talia was doing, or if she was still waiting for a response. I had nothing to prove. My life didn't need to revolve around the roles others cast me in. I wasn't the frame anymore. I was the painting. And for the first time, I wasn't waiting to be noticed, I was simply being. The waitress passed by and smiled. "Another coffee?" "Yes, please," I said, returning the smile. "I'm staying a while." She nodded and moved on, and I turned back to my journal, pen gliding steadily across the page. This was what freedom looked like, not dramatic, not loud, but deeply, quietly mine. I wasn't invited to their wedding. But that didn't mean I wasn't the story. I just stopped letting them write it.